Thank you, Mr. President. It will come to no surprise to members of this place that I rise today to support this motion. My opposition to a voice to Parliament, whether it be constitutionally enshrined or whether it be legislated, has been consistent. It remains my view that a voice to Parliament seeks to create an unfortunate divide in our state based on race. It remains my view that an important pillar of our democracy is that we are all equal. One person, one vote. It remains my view that the establishment of a voice to Parliament undermines the very premise of equal representation, giving greater weight to a vote of one group over another and to create barriers to representation based on race. Generations before us have fought hard and continue to fight for the harmonious ideal that all are equal before the law and all votes are treated equal. It remains my view that creating an expensive administrative third chamber of Parliament for Aboriginal South Australians sends the wrong message. It remains my view that this wrongly tells South Australians that the Parliament is not for all South Australians. Arguably, this wrongly tells Aboriginal South Australians that this Parliament, in its current form, is not for them. It remains my view that Aboriginal South Australians already have a voice. It is in our local government, it's in our state parliament, and it's in our federal parliament. So the question really is, why does the government feel they need what is essentially an expensive administrative third chamber of Parliament to tell them what they should already know? Why not just get on with tackling the issues Indigenous communities are facing, while hearing the input they already receive from the numerous advisory bodies established in this state, of which the voice regrettably seems to ignore? It remains my view that the way in which our Parliament legislates and provides funding must be needs-based and not race-based. When the First Nations Voice Bill was before this Parliament, I stated, and I will state it again, that I cannot stand here in this place, particularly in this chamber which represents and reviews the laws of the land for over 1.7 million South Australians equally, and support any bill that aims to legislate for the creation of a third chamber based on race at our highest level, the South Australian Parliament. It remains my view that we are a nation that must strive to be a fair and tolerant society, and that the Parliament must be a place for all South Australians, whether from Indigenous communities or otherwise. At the time the Parliament debated the First Nations Voice Bill, I highlighted that it would have been beneficial for members of this place to see the results from the federal referendum into a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament, where the views and opinions of the public, in particular the South Australian electorate, was respectfully engaged before legislation was brought to this place on such an important topic. Notwithstanding there was a federal referendum on foot, the Malinauskas Labor government arrogantly pushed ahead with this legislation for a voice to Parliament, disregarding the then upcoming referendum and the views of South Australians. When the resounding results from the referendum came back showing that over 64% of South Australians voted no, the Malinauskas government should have acknowledged that they got it wrong. Instead, we see a government who is pushing ahead with the First Nations voice elections this month, and a government who will not rule out the payment of reparations and compensation to Indigenous communities. The question really is, how much will this cost South Australian taxpayers? It is my view that the attitude to push ahead with a state voice to Parliament, despite such a resounding result at the federal level, particularly here in South Australia, is disrespectful to the will of the South Australian people. The Attorney-General said that the referendum and the state voice are two very separate issues, and that the referendum was about constitutional change. Respectfully, I think that's just semantics. When the Labor government sought to pass their First Nations Voice Bill, in doing so they made an amendment to our state's constitution. Yes, our state constitution is an act of Parliament and does not require a referendum to make changes comprised in the state voice. But the principles behind it in changing what is essentially our state's rulebook, in which our democracy and system of government rests, is the same principle. Our state's constitution has been changed. The government will say that they had a mandate to introduce a voice to Parliament, as this formed one of their long list of election commitments at the 2022 state election. I believe the Attorney-General said it was the very first policy the then Labor opposition announced at NAIDOC Week in 2019. But I put it to the chamber that most South Australians were likely unaware of this commitment when they went to the ballot box in March 2022. I query, Mr President, where the sea of corflutes for voice to Parliament were in amongst the corflutes about the ramping crisis, which, by the way, in case you missed the memo, ramping's now worse than when you formed government. I think many South Australians were probably more focused on the chalk ambulances and the scare campaign that was run by the Labor Party and the Ambulance Employees Association about ramping. The slogan, "Vote Labor like your life depends on it," because it just might, tends to have that effect. I put it to this chamber that the results of the 2023 referendum would be a clearer indication of the level of support for a voice to Parliament, with around 64% of South Australians voting with a resounding no, than the 2022 state election was on this issue. I commend the Honourable Sarah Gain for bringing this motion to the chamber, which I indicate I will be supporting today. I also indicate that I will be supporting the amendments in the name of the Honourable Mr Pangello and the Honourable Mrs Chentefanti. I do indicate as well on behalf of the opposition, as we received late amendments from the Honourable Ms Franks, that on behalf of the opposition that we will not be supporting the amendments moved by the Honourable Ms Franks as they substantially change the intent of the motion. I also do indicate that ultimately, should her amendment succeed, that the opposition will not be supporting the amended motion. While I'm cautious to not anticipate debate on another matter on the notice paper, I draw to the Chamber's attention the Honourable Ms Game's bill to repeal the First Nations voice. A bill that sat on the notice paper for months that would rectify the issue this motion seeks to address. A bill that's been well ventilated in the media by the Honourable Member but remains idle on the notice paper for action to be taken. I would have thought that it would have perhaps have been more timely for this bill to be taken to a vote before the nominations for the First Nations voice election opened, now just weeks away until the elections. But I look forward to when the Honourable Ms Game does bring this bill to a vote, and as has already been indicated, the Liberal Party will be supporting that bill. Mr President, the result from the federal referendum was clear. It was decisive. The government should have waited for that result before pushing ahead with the state-based voice to Parliament. Following these resounding results, the government should have acknowledged that they got it wrong, that the state voice, or any voice, seeks to divide us rather than unite us. Instead, the government has doubled down and will not rule out the payment of reparations or compensation in the future. To conclude, Mr President, I'll share with the chamber some of the comments I've received following my second reading contribution to the First Nations voice. Mr President, one individual says the voice is supposed to be decided by all Australians in a referendum. What happened to the referendum in South Australia? You are railroading the voice idea, government. Stop it. We all have a say. Another person said, not happy, Jan. Another person said, doing this act by... I find it quite interesting that the Attorney-General finds that quite comical that South Australians aren't happy. Another person says, doing this act by passing such a bill may... many people believe will cause a division within the nation, especially when you don't ask people in your state what they believe of this bill has been passed by government is a slap in the face to each person they are supposed to be representing. Another person said, this has to be the people's vote and not just a government decision. They were never given a mandate to make this decision on behalf of all SA residents. Another person said this voice is normalising and embracing systemic racism throughout our country. Another person says, vote no, we are all Australians. Another person says the most important principle is equality before the law, and to appreciate this, one must consider the opposite alternative. How wrong would it be to exclude a group from voting in general elections? You do not increase inclusion and participation through exclusion and deception. The lack of community knowledge and communication on model and impacts is incredibly deceptive and shows the hubris of this Labor government. Another person says, why weren't we asked? Isn't the government meant to be serving all Australians? Another person said, "Funny how the ambulance union has gone very quiet. Malinowskis likes to control lots of aspects of politics, but things are starting to blow up in his face somewhat." Another person said, "Are SA government entitled to dictate without asking the people first?" Another person has said, "Labor arrogance." Another person, "This voice will be another endless money pit with no accountability, transparency or results-based integrity. The people of South Australia should have the right to vote on this state-based decision. It is our money being used on yet another race-based organisation." Another person says, "This country does not need racism at its core. This voice is designed as a racist entity." And another person says, "Don't vote for racism, it's pretty simple." Mr President, in concluding, I'll just draw from my second reading contribution when I say that, like I think all South Australians, my firm belief is that Indigenous communities in South Australia deserve a seat around the table to talk about the issues that are impacting their communities, often disproportionately in matters that are of great significance. But where I differ in my belief is that the table should not be pushed off to the side and relegated to some third chamber, funded on a discretionary basis by the executive government of the day and burdened by bureaucracy and symbolism. The voice for these communities is and should be here in this parliament as a representative for all South Australians and their communities at large, within the existing framework of our great democracy that treats every vote equally, no matter who you are and what your race is. I commend the motion to the place.